Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. It's Monday night. I'm here with the contest crew again. Chris Hurlbut, KL9A, Dan Craig, N6MJ, Randy Thompson, K5ZD, and Scott Wright, K0MD. We're really fortunate to have these experienced contesters here on the contest crew, and we get to gain from their years and years of experience. I've asked them tonight to help us out with the good habits and bad habits the good habits that we should focus on and the bad habits that we all should avoid. So let's just jump right in. Chris, why don't we start with you?
Let's start with the good habits. I actually thought about this one for a week or so, and some of the best advice I ever got was kind of off the cuff with someone else. And there's two ways to operate. You can either operate to have fun, or you can operate seriously to win, which can also be fun. But I always think about that. So one thing I would say to do is operate with purpose. If you are operating competitively, say against Mr. Craig over here, you've got to know that he's not going to give you an inch. So you have to operate every minute with purpose. And it's easy to get complacent. If you're doing a 48-hour contest, believe me, you're going to get tired and you're not going to want to do it. But if you constantly think, okay, I have to keep pushing hard, I have to tune for more mults, I have to run faster, I have to keep getting the calls right, that's made a big difference for me as far as increasing my scores, because it's not something you think of when you're in the slow times. And it's just like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. It's like you have to keep pushing because your competition is more than likely pushing also. That's my number one must do of this list.
So let me say something to that. It tends to manifest itself in my mind as I hate to lose. And I darn sure don't want to lose because I didn't spend the time or the effort. So nothing is worse. And oftentimes this will happen where you think you're doing great or you're way ahead or there's no way anyone could be keeping up with me. So I'll take a little bit of extra time off or I'll go do something. And then you lose by a few QSOs. So that's why if you are trying to be competitive, you kind of have to keep your nose down and keep plugging away, because nothing is worse than having to spend a whole year going, wow, if only I had ...
And even worse, you got to hear from the guy that beat you for the entire year.
Oh yeah, without a
Ask me
doubt.
how I know.
And we one saying that we have at ND7K along these same lines is that every Q matters. And the reason why we say that is we had actually a contest where we were trying to break the record in sweepstakes CW, the W6YI record for multi-op, and we were far enough ahead that I thought we were going to get it after log checking, and then all of a sudden log check the actual results came out, and we were literally one contact behind the old record. And so that always drives us a lot during these contests. Every contact matters. And then, like Chris is saying, you get down to the grindstone, do the actual work, and then the results will come from that.
We had a multi-single at N5AU one year in WPX phone, and a transformer blew up outside, and so we lost power. So we fired up a generator and finished the contest on low power, but we did break the U.S. record at the time. So it's, if you're going to commit, I always say, like, if you're going to commit, you might as well commit all the way. There's no point in just doing it halfway. If you're only going to do halfway, you might as well just goof off and then have fun.
We had the same thing in Costa Rica. We did a multi-2 in ARRLCW, and ARRLCW gets really boring the second day. And of course, we're in Costa Rica. It's beautiful. And we're sitting there. It was Cam and I, and we're just like, oh my gosh, this is awful. Like, we're running 40 an hour on 2 radios. We worked everybody yesterday. We should just go to the beach. I was like, nah, we're gonna push it out. And anyway, long story short, we pushed it out. We didn't really have a whole lot of fun at the end. We ended up winning the contest by something like 10 QSOs. And we come to find out the guys we beat, who are all very good friends of ours, decided to slack off just a little bit. And they cracked a couple beers towards the end of the contest. And that was actually the record for a very long time. And that was a lesson learned again, that you just got to keep pushing hard.
And Chris, what about that bad habit that we all should avoid?
My number one bad habit, and this was kind of comes to light during WPX when you have serial numbers. Everybody hears it. You tune across your competition and they're running fast and you don't hear anybody. Or you're tuning around because you can't run. And you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to kill me. He's been running the whole time. It just gets in your head when really it's just different propagation. You was probably listening to you an hour ago run guys that he couldn't hear, and it gets in your head. Or you hear the serial numbers in WPX. There's a 12-hour off time rule. You don't know what his off time is. You don't know what his points per QSO is. All you know is his serial number is higher than yours, and that can either be a big motivator or it can just crush you. So it's easy to get in that mindset, but my advice is just don't worry about the competition. If they have better band conditions, so what? They have better band conditions. If they have better band conditions and you grind it out more than they did and they slacked off, you still win. Well, you've got bragging rights for a year.
Well, Chris, you just said don't worry about the competition, but like 5 minutes ago, you're very worried about Dan's performance. So
yeah, but he's different because I know he doesn't let off the gas ever. So when I tune by him, so here's an example at TI7 and ZF, they're completely different propagation. Like it's ridiculous. And I'll hear him running guys and it's like, oh my gosh, I don't hear like literally nothing. But I know that I can work, 10 meters better or whatever. So you can't get it into your head, but you got to be aware of your competition not letting up. And that's the difference there.
Well, Kevin, I'm going to offer a different perspective on what Randy and Chris have said. Okay. Because their mindset could be construed as saying, just work harder and you'll do better. I think you have to work strategically. Every contest has points that you lose if you copy the wrong call sign or if you make another mistake, like a serial number miscopy or a zone miscopy. And I think some people are afraid of losing 10 QSOs between, let's say, 0800 GMT and 0900 GMT, which is the middle of the night for anywhere in the U.S. And so they stay up and they work, and they have a very low rate. And then the next day, when they actually have much higher rates, they're so tired they don't realize they're making copying mistakes. So I think if you're young, like Chris and Dan, or so good at doing this like Randy that you do it in your sleep probably, you're fine to do this when you're tired. But most contesters are not in that great a shape and that disciplined. And so they need to work strategically. And sometimes that means during a low 3-hour window of low QSO numbers, you should probably sleep and rest, or get out of the chair, get your head back in the game, and then come back so you can work strategically. I think working with a purpose is critical, but you also have to know your own limits and your own biological habits and, tailor to that. The last thing we want are people having their scores reduced 15, 20% because they tried to stay up all night and they just really physically cannot do it. And I think, one thing Chris told me a long time ago is he starts practicing for major contests in the summer using CW devices like Morris Runner, I think, and others. And I think that's important. Some of these guys are like professional golfers. They're in the off season. They're really practicing and working. Most of us aren't running pileups on the software programs, off season. We're just doing other things. If you're a station like mine, you're doing antenna work or other stuff. But so I think you have to, be in shape, be disciplined, but also realize what your limits are. Sometimes you need to hold them. Sometimes you need to fold them. And then there are times you have to walk away and get some sleep.
Well, I'll echo that because I've done a number of 48-hour efforts or near 48-hour efforts, and now I don't even try anymore. I know I'm going to sleep 90 minutes the first night because the rates the next morning are so high and so important that what I give away in that 90 minutes is easily made up for by being awake all the way through the day. So I go ahead and just build that into my plan. Now, sometimes if conditions are good and things are going well, I'll go, okay, well, I don't need to sleep. I'll just keep going. But for the most part, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Take a break.
And Scott, what's that one bad habit that drives you crazy that you wish people could break?
Well, there are lots. Let me share a couple things I like and a couple things I maybe don't like. I like it when people are identifying every QSO or every couple of QSOs, so I don't have to sit there and wonder who they are. What drives me bad at your stations who don't ID for a minute or two, and that just frustrates me because then I've wasted a minute of my time trying to ID them and I just move on. So I think you don't have to QSO ID after every thank you K0MD on CW, but at least do it every 2 to 3 QSO, so people aren't wondering who you are, and even when I do it every 2 to 3, I still get people sending a question mark in the middle of me trying to copy a station calling me. And they just because they haven't listened for more than 15 or 20 seconds. The other thing that I really like are stations who know that they're worth points and they work me. What really kind of drives me a little batty, and I've had these discussions with Randy offline, are people in like CQ Worldwide who work me from the U.S. because they're worth 0 points to me after I make my first Zone 3, Zone 4, and Zone 5 contact. And I try to make those with Canadian stations because they're worth a point or two, not 0 points like U.S. stations. But then every log report I get, I've miscopied something from one of those U.S. stations, and I've lost several percent on my score. And I'm asking myself, why in the world am I working them, And because I try to be nice, but gee, it's costing me. And so I think it's really helpful if people know the rules. I've had stations call me and they won't give me the proper ID, whether it's a serial number or their state or their section. Well, I'm not in the contest. I just wanted to give you a QSO. Thanks a lot, What you need to do is tell everyone your state or this. So the next person you work, you'll seem like you know what you're doing. But, it doesn't take more than a minute to pull up contestcalendar.com, find the contest, and look under the exchange. I do that all the time when I don't know what's going on, and then I try to give that exchange. So those are the small things that kind of irritate me during a contest.
So let me set the record straight here. You cannot lose any points for working a 0 point USA, even if you bust their call.
I have. I'm
You
happy
can't.
to send you my log checking report because I already have a couple of times, but I do.
You
So I
can
know
lose the
say that,
multiplier.
but my scores get adjusted all the time because of that.
Well, not in the Worldwide or WPX. You can lose
They
the
do.
multiplier. You can lose the multiplier, but you cannot lose QSO points because the contact is 0 points.
Well, Dan and Chris have told me that you guys are really out to try to get us in the 0 and 9 call district, so we just accept it for that.
You know what? We don't even bother to try to get you guys.
Your scores are low enough. It just doesn't matter.
That's right. Yeah,
it's like those
just
bugs
so
in the
people
Florida.
aren't familiar. A good run from Zero Land on Saturday morning in CQ Worldwide, it might be 80 to 100 stations an hour. Randy's going to get 3 times that.
We would love that in W7.
Dan, what about you? What's the good habit that you'd like to emphasize?
So I know Scott just said this. I'm going to touch on it one more time too, and that's signing your call sign. And I know Chris will agree with me on this. And me and Chris, we have some of the highest rate hours that ever recorded. And I can guarantee you, especially on CW, we sign our call sign every single contact. And then on phone, it's every second or third contact. And we've had, high rates there too. I think it's super, super important to remember that, because that is something that's super, super frustrating when you're tuning around the bands and you come across somebody and they're not IDing, and like that drives me batty. So I think Scott was right on, but I just wanted to follow up on that because it is such a big point. So one of the things that I think is important to remember when you're contesting is don't be a bully. Okay, what I mean by that is even if you have a big signal, you should always do things courteously. You don't want to make a bad name for yourself. You want to do things like, make sure the frequency is actually in use before you start CQing, whether it be asking if it's in use, or maybe send a CQ once and see what happens, or whatever it is that you do. But if somebody comes back and says it's in use, then you move on. That's how it should be. I've operated from some of the biggest stations in the world. I don't just sit there and not pay attention to what's on the frequency. So definitely don't be a bully. And I think that I don't know. So that's the thing I want. That was the 2 things I wanted to focus on for right now. So I'm going to hand that back to you, Kevin.
Can we go back to call sign IDing just for a second? One of the defenses that I've heard a few times that people don't identify in order to control the pileup. What do you guys say to that?
Hang on, I'll take that one. So okay, there's controlling the pileup, and then there's letting it go crazy with people asking who you are because you don't ID. There's a big difference. Like Dan said, he's operated at all the biggest stations in the world. He said the highest rates ever. Randy, same thing. If you listen to these guys, they're controlling the pileup by IDing. And okay, let's say you ID every third QSO on phone. Okay, that's how many seconds? 30 seconds total? Maybe, probably less if you're running high rate. Most people will sit there way longer than that anyway. That's controlling the pileup by working them fast, not having a bunch of guys saying, "Hey man, what's your call? Who are you?" You will listen to guys not ID for 40 QSOs in CQ Worldwide, and that is not controlling the pileup because they're going to get a lot of dupes, and it's just that's the opposite. When they say they're going to control the pileup by not IDing, that's false, in my opinion. That is the opposite way they should go.
Yeah, if you don't send your call, you're asking for people to bother you because they're going to have to ask you what's your call, and then you're not going to give it. Then they're going to ask you again, and then it becomes a game where they're going to keep asking you until they're going to bludgeon you into giving your call eventually. So just short circuit the whole process and give it. And by the way, this was going to be my number one as well. It was QSL, QRZ. QSL, QRZ, QSL, QRZ. If you've got time to say that, you just had time to say your call. And it would have served the exact same purpose.
I think that's a good point, Kevin. So I hear what Randy just said is a really good tip for people. After you finish the QSO, you don't need to say QSL, QRZ. You can say K5ZD.
So in 6AA once, there are always these debates that say, oh, you should send your call every time. And sometimes I'll run guys and I'll send my call every time just to see how many QSOs can I make in an hour while I send my call every time. And it turns out it's well north of 120 without really trying too hard. So really no excuse. But Dick Norton used to always say that if you send your call every time or you mandate that people do that, you're demonstrating that your operating skills are not as good as you think they are. A really good operator will work more than one guy at a time without sending his call, because there are times where you can do that. There are times where you are trying to whittle off a few real loud guys because you know there's some weak guys in there and you want to give them a chance. Or you can hear somebody from a different part of the world and it's like, if I just kind of throw everything off balance a little bit by saying thanks, that guy might have a chance to sneak through. But just as Chris said, you get away with that because you're working people fast enough and you say your call often enough that it's okay. The pileup doesn't lose track of who you are. Although I can remember one time in the Worldwide, I'm running guys. I finally go, okay, I'm going to work a couple of guys without sending my call. And sure enough, the second QSO, somebody goes, what's your call? There's always somebody tuning by who's going to do that. In the Florida QSO party this past week, I worked a guy. I didn't know his call, but I knew he was in a new county, so I knew he was a new QSO for me. I listened to him work 15 people in a row on CW without ever sending his call. And I'm sitting there having to wait. And there were 3 or 4 times during the contest weekend where I got up and walked away from the radio because I got sick and tired of listening to people not send their call. I said, you know what? This is hard enough scavenger hunting for counties in Florida without the mobiles not telling you who they are. So it's the heck with them. I'm going to go do something else. So just, like I said, that's my pet. If we're going to have a pet one, that's it. And I think it's being exacerbated by the fact that the cluster use is more and more now. So you can have these really long extended runs where people just keep calling you because they've seen your call on the cluster. And to that, I will say this. When we do the spot checking in the CQ Worldwide contest to find people who are using the cluster and forget to tell us that they did, we often find cases where somebody worked a guy, but that guy hasn't been there for 5 minutes. Like there was a spot, the spots have a lifetime, and maybe in your logging software of 10, 15, 20 minutes. That guy got spotted, he worked some people, he left. Another guy came and took the frequency. He's not sending his call either. And all these people think they worked the wrong guy. So unfortunately for the runner, there's really no impact, right? He's working people, putting them in his log. But for the guys who are calling, they're having jeopardy because they don't actually know who they're working. So you need to send your call so that they know, so that they're not having to bug you. Because if they're really paying attention, they should be bugging you for your call. They should not trust what they see on the screen. I'm going to throw a fun one in here, changing the subject, and that's please copy.
There it is.
No, there's actually no. I'm going to say this 2 ways. There's nothing wrong with calling somebody and then saying please copy my number, my 591472 or whatever. There's actually nothing wrong with that, except for that, 1.5 or 2 seconds that it takes to say it. And for people who are just starting out, where you're still trying to spend a lot of mental energy to know, okay, I've got to say the call, and then I need some kind of separator. It's almost like, all right, I need some punctuation around this exchange. So I'm going to say, please copy. But you listen to the good guys, they're not saying please copy ever. It's because they've already internalized the fact that I'm going to give a call sign and I'm going to give an exchange, and I expect the guy on the other end to know that that's the pattern, and so that's what's coming at them. It's kind of a funny one sometimes, the whole please copy thing. Like I said, it's okay if you do it, but it's a little bit like just a verbal tick, right? Just try to work on getting it out of the vocabulary, and it just makes things a little more efficient, especially as you start to move up in skills and you're working a lot higher rate.
Well, and I think the 5-9 is the punctuation to say, okay, this is what's coming next. So you don't have to have 2 periods at the end of a sentence to know you're done, right? So I look at it as that. And if you're wasting syllables, you're wasting time. Time's finite. You've got to make more QSOs in that time. So if you say please copy 300 times, that's a lot of Qs.
It's funny how this whole concept of time and how you use it, it's somewhat different from both sides of the conversation here, or the QSO. The guy who's trying to work 10,000 people in a weekend, time is everything. To the guy who's going to work 20 people in the 2 hours he's on, got plenty of it.
Yep.
And that,
but
to
the
me,
guy he's calling doesn't.
No, but this is what makes contesting to me so endlessly fascinating. It's even more than the computerized gaming people. We have to deal with real humans on the other side. And part of the art, and again, you listen to the good guys, and somehow they get people in the groove, like, hey, I'm moving, it's happening this way. I expect you to, humans are going to mirror the behavior that they're seeing. The art is being able to get people to do what you want them to do without telling them to do it. Or being able to deal with it when you get the guy who's like, hey, just put up my new tri-bander. It's at 30 feet. I was wondering how you're hearing me, that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, you got to answer them and then just kind of keep moving. I had somebody who one day start chatting to me, and I'm like trying to be nice. And finally it's like, hey man, I got it. Where guys calling me. I got to go. So, but that's all part of the game. And then in terms of good habits, I think preparation, we've talked a little bit about reading the rules in advance. Unfortunately, Scott, the people that you're unhappy with are probably not in the contest, so that's why they don't feel like they need to read the rules. You should be happy that they're calling you. I'm never unhappy that somebody calls. But do read the rules, know what they are, and then do a little, if you want to be serious, do a little bit of prep time, look at logs that are already out there, talk to people who traditionally do well in the contest, and find out where should I be when, what should I expect, when are good times to take off times. It's not a lot of questions. All you really need is a basic kind of some guidelines, or give me the trail markings so that I know as I go through the weekend kind of what to expect. And that way, when you run into those doldrum periods, you're not surprised. You're not like, oh, am I missing something? No, it's supposed to be. It's always bad like this. Go to bed now. So that would be something I would advocate for people to do.
Good to let people call you. I'm happy to work an occasional U.S. station. But what happens is if you work one, it's like giving a mouse a cookie. Suddenly you'll have a whole cluster of people who want to work you from the U.S. who can't hear anybody else to work. And so they're working you. And then what happens, at least where I live, probably the same is true for Chris, maybe Dan, is the weaker stations in Europe or Asia that you're trying to work are being covered up by the louder U.S. stations. And so I think people may assume that we're being rude when we ignore them. But if you're not worth any points, I'm always going to go for the 1 or 2 or 3 point station over the 0 point station in a contest. And you may not appreciate the fact that you're covering up stations that someone who has limited time, whether it's 48 hours or 2 hours, needs to work.
Hey, you U.S. guys, get off my lawn.
What I think we need to do really in CQ Worldwide is just to give, a bonus point of 3 points and nothing else for everybody in the U.S. who works K5ZD, and then they can all work you, and then we'll have the DX.
That's fine, man. Bring them up for 3 points apiece. I'll take every one of them. But I have to. The reason I'm pushing back on this a little bit, Scott, is it makes me crazy when I hear contesters go, "I don't like these people who are calling me." It's like, dude, that's exactly wrong. I'm sorry. We want people to call us because maybe this weekend it's not so great, but next weekend it'll be really good. So I never am unhappy because somebody. Yeah, it may be annoying, but I'm not going to say it on the air.
One thing I wanted to bring up that's kind of similar to this same topic is, strategy when you are running guys. There are, if you're in CQ Worldwide and you're on the DX side and you're running really fast, this doesn't apply to that. But if you're doing like a domestic contest and it is like a serial number contest, and Chris mentioned earlier that we, all the syllables that we speak waste time when they're not needed. But one thing that I always do in a serial number contest when I don't have a lot of guys calling, if somebody calls in and they give me number one, I always, every single time, I'll say, thank you for number one. I appreciate it. And then I move on. And the reason that I do that is because I know for a fact that there's 10 other people that are listening and they're afraid to call in because they don't know what they need or what I need. And if I say thank you for number one, almost every single time, I get 3 or 4 more guys that just all of a sudden throw their call in and they give me number one as well. And hey, when it comes to trying to get the biggest score possible, now it's different for CQ Worldwide, but everything else, we need all those guys that are not in the contest to call us. That's how you really get the highest score, is by working the non-contesters. And I think that's a really important point I wanted to make out for this. And again, if you're in CQ Worldwide, it doesn't work so well, but at any serial number contest, every single time I do it, and it always works. And there's always guys that are listening that will call you.
Yeah, or even if it's states or transmitter power or whatever, in the end, you the guy will go, "What do you need?" And you tell them, and you're really explaining it for all the people who are listening. And there's always people listening. That's the amazing part. There's guys who have set the radio on somebody and they listen, and the art is to make them want to call you before they go do something else.
What about the guy who's running a frequency and he responds to a really faint call and spends longer than usual trying to dig that call out? Bad habit or good habit?
It kind of depends. Yeah,
See?
It depends on what you're trying to do. Because there are times where I get somebody like that calls me, and if I can't get their exchange on the second go around, I just let it go and then move on. Now that's if you're in CQ Worldwide, you're at a high rate. It doesn't help your score to waste a lot of time on somebody like that. Now, if you're in a lower rate contest, or let's say you're in sweepstakes or something like that, where every cue counts again, I will spend extra time trying to work that guy and pull him out. There is always that point where it's just not going to work and you have to cut him loose. But I think it kind of depends on what the situation is, how long you try and keep him on the hook.
It's a great point to bring up, Kevin, because there are a lot of people like, oh, I have this guy calling me, I have to spend some effort. But really, from a score perspective, you're almost better to like, sorry, I can't hear you, come back later or something like that. Because a lot of times the band will change and they will get louder later on, or they will call in later. It's just not worth it if you know that there's a good chance there are other people waiting or other people who will call you, not to get too bogged down. I don't know what's the magic amount of time, Dan, that you would go around with somebody.
I'd say in a high rate situation, I wouldn't spend more than like 15, 20 seconds on the guy. In a low rate situation, you might spend more like 45 seconds trying to work the guy, because that time is justifiable. But I think anything more than like a minute and a half, now you've wasted more time that you could have worked other people, and that's where it gets to be too long.
A minute would seem like an eternity, right? When you think about it. I mean, really, even I think you said it right the first time. It's not about time; it's about overs. If we're not making progress after 3 overs, then it's probably time to move on. And this is the thing in serial number contests like WPX. You struggle to get the call, and you're like, oh man, there is no way. Now we got to do the number. And what's always amazing to me sometimes is you work guys where you're like, that guy has no idea how lucky he was.
Yeah, Kevin, I think this is a real habit by people who start contesting as either DXers or POTA operators, where they struggle to make QSOs. And I think the hardest skill to learn if you were a DXer first or a POTA enthusiast first is that you have to just let contacts go. After you've done contesting for a few years, you really know you shouldn't waste any time coming back. You're just not going to hear them. Because of the QSB and the energy level and the atmosphere, but just tell them to come back because they do get stronger. And I think the other point that really needs to be made is any 2 or 3 point QSO in CQ Worldwide or any DX contact in 8RRLDX is worth the same as the other. So if you have this really rare station in Mongolia, but you have 7 people in Europe you can work, you're better off spending time doing the 7 QSOs in Europe and not worrying about the Mongolia station that has a huge pileup. I hear this a lot in the contest with the African stations. Now, sure, some people want them for the mults or for the zones, and then sometimes you need them because you've worked every mult but that. But there comes a point that you really shouldn't waste your time spending 10 or 15 minutes trying to work that station in a very unruly pileup. Just wait. Half the time when I'm running on 20, the stations that I passed on working who are rare will call me because they burn out trying to deal with a pileup, or they can work one person every 2 minutes because everybody keeps calling and nobody pauses. So just remember, every contact is worth the same. There is no special contact, no special bonus if you work someone in Madagascar versus someone in Estonia. They're all equal.
So I feel like a lot of the bad habits could be associated with newcomers to contesting or people that are learning their way. I'm curious to hear, what are the bad habits you hear from the experienced contesters, the people that are pulling in big scores? Because I'm sure they're not all as great as you guys.
Dan hit it on the head with his bullying comment. Yeah, that's why we're all laughing. Because let's be honest, we all know who we're talking about, and there's several calls that fit that bill. And there's this, I guess, it's not overreaching, but this common opinion of, I have the biggest antennas, I'm in the best location, I'm the loudest, my frequency, go away. Yeah, sorry, man, that's just not how it works. You have to be courteous to a certain point. And if you're running on the same frequency and you can't hear anything, the other guy can't hear anything either. You're losing the contest. That's something that experienced contests do way more often than inexperienced contesters. And that is an awful habit and not a good example to set for people that are looking to come up.
Another one that I see is people who just send fast all the time. Like, there are some guys who just always are sending 38 words a minute.
That's slow.
The band could,
now.
The band could
That's
be
slow, man.
Well, that's beyond my top end. So I'm not. So anything up 38 and up is too fast for me. But the band will be terrible, or it'll be on 160, or there'll be flutter or something, and this guy's still sending the same speed, or nobody's calling him, and he calls EQ over and over and over again. And it's just. There's just some people who that's the way they want to do CW, and I guess it's fine. They don't usually win, so it's okay. But I would call that a bad habit. If you're sending beyond what the conditions or the propagation will allow, you're probably wasting time in multiple dimensions.
But that applies to phone too. I was going to mention that earlier in one of my comments, because on phone, if you have a big pileup and you have lots of rate, you can talk fast, right? But if you're, once it gets to a point where there's not guys calling, there's no real reason to talk really fast, especially if you're trying to work DX, especially for us here on the West Coast trying to work JAs. If you're talking so fast they can't understand you, now you've scared people away unnecessarily. So I think that holds true both on phone and on CW2. And I think one of my pet peeves when it comes to experienced contesters is guys who vacate their frequency, doing whatever it is that they're doing on another radio. They're gone for, let's say, 2 or 3 minutes even sometimes. And then all of a sudden, I'm there running guys. I've already worked 10 guys on this frequency. They come back and they start CQing again as if they never left. I think that's extremely bad habit. Like, I would never do that. If you're not able to be there to... I'm not going to do that because I don't ever leave my frequency. I'm in control of what I'm doing all the time. Okay, so I know what's happening.
That's something you can aspire to be like, Chris.
I'll work on that.
Yeah. So if you actually listen to the radios, you understand what's going on. You know what I'm saying? But yeah. So if you leave, like, and there's somebody else is there running, like, it's not your frequency anymore. That's not how it works. And that's something that we get more from experienced contesters versus newer ones. And it's just really frustrating at times, too.
Yeah, that happened to me in one of the last contests I did. I stepped away for, I think, less than a minute to work somebody on another band and come back to my run frequency, and my neighbor, K4IU, is running there, and I just had to laugh out loud. that I'd lost it to a guy running low power and wires. One of the issues that I've encountered that Dan might, Chris or Randy might call bullying is when you're working in a contest and suddenly stations that are sharing that frequency but don't hear each other because of propagation, you start hearing them. So somebody's got to move, and it's just easier to move instead of fighting it out, and that just happens, especially in the contest where the W6s aren't hearing us, and then an hour or two into the band getting better, we're now suddenly two on that same frequency. So that does happen, and just assume the best about people. And just for the record, I have no idea who the bullying stations are that you guys seem so confident to know. So
yeah, we know who they are.
Know.
We have a list.
Yeah, we can write
It's
them down.
very long, but we've got it. And we add more every contest.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that W1DED is not on that list.
Yeah. What's that, Scott?
It's safe to say that W1DED is not on that list.
Correct. And we better keep it that way, right, Kevin?
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's that main guy.
Kevin's going to be so
guys
afraid
are
to get on
bullies.
for the next contest. He's not going to show up.
You're in Maine, man.
Different call.
You got a target on your back. Right.
Before we wrap up, let's go around one more time. Randy, any more?
No, I was just thinking about pilot behavior, but it kind of is what it is. There are some pilots where, yes, the last guy calling is going to win, so therefore it becomes this continuously rolling mess. And there are other cases where people just say, I'm going to lock this pile up until the guy comes back to me. And so just like Dan has been saying all along, the golden rule still applies. Everything works a lot better if everybody has a little bit of patience, checks their ego, not all of it, but at least some of it, so that the goal here is we could play defense and prevent the DX station from working people, but it actually is better off overall if we don't do it that way.
I had one other thing on my list that we didn't talk about, and it's geared towards new contesters who are just starting out. It's always a good idea to send your call sign phonetically and not just say it without phonetics. It's extremely hard on the running station's end to really hear exactly what you're saying when you don't use phonetics. Now, does it take more time to say those syllables? It does, but then you waste time because the guy can't get it, then you have to repeat it. So I think for a new contester that's just starting out, always send your full call and always send it phonetically, and that's going to help out the run station.
Is it a good habit or bad habit to use something other than the standard phonetics if someone's not hearing your call sign?
I don't like the cute, fancy phonetics, I would say. So for myself, N6MJ, I use Mexico, Japan most of the time. It might not be exactly what's stated in the manual, but I think as long as you stick to something that's similar to that in nature, you're fine. But don't use some weird stuff with your phonetics. I don't know.
I've got phonetics for your call, Dan.
Yeah, it depends on who you're working, Kevin. If I use Kilo Zero Mike Delta, I get a lot of callbacks from the JA stations. They think I'm Mike Alpha. So I'll use Mexico David or Mike David, But if I use Mexico Denmark, the Europeans do not seem to understand that as well as the traditional Mike Delta. So I think you learn, you look at your log checking report, and Randy's now convinced that I'm OCD on my log checking report. But I look at it and I figure out, who's not understanding what I'm saying, and I try to tailor it to who I'm working a little bit, Sometimes I'll use colloquial phonetics. People in South America sometimes, because of English is not the first language, and when they speak Spanish, I have to ask them to repeat, right? So we all struggle with second languages. And so I'll use a phonetics, like Mexico Diego, and Argentinian or Chilean station quickly understand that's M and D instead of, Mike David or Mike Alpha, Mike Delta, which I think might be Mike Alpha or something.
I think the real lesson, the tip here is have at least two sets of phonetics for your call, because oftentimes you'll be in you're trying to copy a guy and he'll keep saying the same letters over and over again, and he can say these letters as many times as you want, and it's not helping him understanding. And so by being able to use the second set of letters, now we can triangulate on what the call sign probably is.
So I found a lot of stations when I would say Kilowatt Zero Mike Delta, they would send me I'd be in their log as KW0MD. So now I just say kilo.
Yeah, that doesn't. I see that in the log checking. It doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, it's almost always results in a bust for the other guy, and you're kind of like, where did he get this KW from?
Real quick, I don't want to take too much time, but one of my don't do's is don't chase bad spots. And what I mean by that is have some call sign recognition, understand who's getting spotted, who's not. And if you see, I don't know, ZF1A spotted, and then you see ZF1AA spotted, okay, chances are pretty dang good that it's ZF1A, not ZF1AA. So kind of have some, wherewithal of what's going on, especially if you're on CW with the skimmer. You're not going to work T5AB ever, but you realize that Somali is not super loud right now, right? It's a bust. BY1V is not a Chinese station that's super loud on 10 meters at 20 Zulu. It's 6Y1V. So have some call recognition there, especially in this day and age of spots and everyone being assisted. That's super important. And I see that all the time in multi-ops. Guys don't have the, they just like see a spot, they jump on it. So, just take half a second, think about it. The other thing that I would like to say is, to goes along with operating with purpose, but if you're a weak station, you need to act loud to be loud, right? Just act loud, get the right frequency, and just find a way to make it happen. The best example of that is N2NL. He's got small antennas and wherever he is, and he's got records all over the world that are never going to be broken with the spider beam and verticals. And he's the only guy I know that can operate with anything ever and break pileups and work every country on the planet on every single band. And it blows my mind. But you can do it with small antennas. You just have to act like it.
Yeah, and good audio for phone. We just can't emphasize that enough. I think I talk about that every time. Good audio just cuts right through. Bad audio, it's just asking for repeats, or it just turns into the mush, and you just don't get through.
And good audio doesn't mean you spend $300 for a highly popular named microphone. You can have great audio with a $40 microphone. You just need to process it and get on the air with someone who knows you and have them help you tweak it a little bit. I worked K9YR once on my second radio, and I said, "How's the audio?" And he said, "It's lousy." And I said, "Seriously?" I just EQ'd it. And then I looked and I forgot to turn the EQ on. And so then he was kind enough to take a minute with me, and we ran through it and I tweaked it, But if he hadn't been honest with me, I wouldn't have realized that my second radio, all the time I'd spent setting it up, I forgot to turn the on button on, or whatever it was I needed to do.
By the way, some of these $40 gaming headsets that you can get, they're better than anything that's available in the ham market. They sound awesome. They're usually very comfortable because the gamers they're just like us. They're going to wear them forever. I'm using a Sennheiser gaming headset that's 10 years old, and I get all kinds of great comments about the audio. So, yeah, it's not about the price of the microphone. It's about finding a good one or getting the equalizer set up correctly. But worth the time. It's worth the time to get somebody to sit, spend a few minutes with you and help you figure it out.
Well, as usual, all good stuff, guys. I really appreciate it. You've been watching the Contest Crew episode 12. If you have questions or topics that you'd like the Contest Crew to answer for you, just send me an email. My email is on the QRZ page, or just put a comment on one of the YouTube videos. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah,
Kevin, Randy, Dan. We always thank Kevin, but I don't ever thank everybody else.
Right?
well, because he's doing all the work.